Okay, fantastic. Thank you, BevCam. Good evening. Welcome to the Beverly School Committee Standing Committee on Finance and Facilities. Today is Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. We're meeting in a remote model today using a remote meeting application, allowing for remote participation and for public access to the open portions of our meeting. Which actually this evening there are none. We are being recorded by the platform and broadcast by BevCam. Thank you, BevCam. On June 16th, 2021, the former governor signed Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, and on February 12th, and then again on July 16th, 2022, he extended the provisions to, among other things, allow public bodies to continue to hold meetings remotely until March 31st, 2023. Now, our current governor and legislature extended further 2 years until March 31st, 2025. These acts specifically suspend the need for a quorum and the chair to be physically present, and it asks our body to use technical methods to allow safe public access. As a note, Beverly has prior approval for remote participation, although through that permission, the chair and the quorum must be physically present when this act and its extension expires. Tonight's Finance and Facilities meetings, which means members of the public do not have an opportunity to address our body. Joining us today are members of the school committee, various members of the district administration, leadership teams, as well as volunteers from our community. We will conduct a full roll call attendance in a moment. For the record, since the meeting application sometimes does not display all participants. Please remember that any audio and video you supply on this platform will become part of this meeting record. As such, please use your mute functionality to prevent background noises. And now I'll conduct a roll call. In the room from the school committee, we have Dr. Kenan McKenzie.
Here.
Thank you. We have Kimberly Coelho.
Here.
As our technical IT person for the evening, we have Chair Ray A. Bell.
Here, but not here.
Yes, thank you. In the IT role, she will not be participating or voting. Members of our community that sit on FNF with us, Ms. DeGeneva.
Here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Manzo.
Here.
Thank you. From our city council, the representative this evening is Todd Rotundo.
Here.
We have our recording secretary, Liz Curran. No. Yes, a new name. I'm sorry.
Wilson.
Okay, I'm sorry. Are we getting a new nameplate for her?
Yeah, we didn't even have them out.
Okay. No, I'm really bad with names, so then I'll try to even harder. We have one more meeting where I could possibly not booger that up, okay? From our school administration, we have Director of Finance and Operations, Jean Sherburne.
Here.
In the back row, we have Director of Pupil Services, maybe? HR, okay. Ms. Brown. Online with us, we have Assistant Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Flaherty.
Here.
Fantastic. I don't see anyone else online. Have I failed to call anyone? Oh, and myself, Lorinda Visnick. Okay. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. Zoom, where are you? Share my screen. Share. We should have not that file. We should have, oh, I apologize, not that file either. We got a lot of things going on this laptop, people. Here we go. Our agenda for the evening is, first item on the agenda is to approve our meeting minutes from our last meeting. I'm showing them on the screen right now. We last met on Wednesday, April 26th. I'm looking for a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Coelho.
Second.
Was that Dr. McKenzie?
Yes.
Thank you. Any comments or corrections? Hearing none, we have no one remote this evening, which is fantastic. So we can just vote by a show of hands right here and right now. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes? Okay, how many we got tonight? 4, 5, 0, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That passes 5-0. Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda, I'm going to make this agenda a little larger for people who are trying to view at home or on BevCam. Yep. Is our budget transfers. Ms. Sherburne, is this the journal entry?
Yes, this is actually the journal entry right from Munis.
Okay, I'm opening that. I'm going to make it a little larger, and I'm going to, before I ask you to speak to it, I'm going to ask for a motion, excuse me, to approve this transfer. Thank you, Mr. Manzo. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Coelho. I mowed the lawn today, and my allergies are really fired up. All right, Ms. Sherburne, will you please speak to this transfer?
Yes, so this transfer is number 816. I did not put that on the agenda, but it's 816, and this was to clear a lot of buildings and grounds accounts, and anything that I couldn't have moved, I could not have moved within the cost center. So what you will see on line 16 is the substitutes. Is $50,000, and that is, one of the areas that I bring up each month that we'll watch, and I found the other day that we only had $326 left, so I moved $50,000 in there. And then, excuse me, the other big area that I needed to move money into was the high school electric account was $30,000. And the transportation for athletics was $8,000. And at the very top, the custodial supplies line needed $20,000. The other areas are just other amounts, but where we were taking the money from is, as you can see on line 18, I took some from the McEwen Electric, the Hannah Electric, and the Cove Electric to help offset the what the high school needed. And so, and then I did look at other accounts to see where I know that we have money right now to fix that. And then this was a two-sided report, I hope that came out. And then what I needed to do is what we started to look at salary accounts. So as you know, each year I talk about if staff takes extended leave like maternity leaves, which we do have an awful lot of maternities at the Ayers School. That is where I took the money to offset the, substitute line.
All right, I'm looking around the room. My eyes are focused on you, Mr. Manzo, expecting your hand to go up.
Yes.
Please.
So, Jean, thanks for the report. It's a little bit different format than I remember. And so just to be clear, debit is where the column that says debit.
Yep, so that had to increase the budget?
That's where you're adding money into these
Yes.
lines. And the column that says credit, where the money's coming from.
Right, so where there was available money.
And then there's a slight misalignment, so you kind of have to,
Yes,
the number values sort of fall between the text.
yes,
So, for example, the line you pointed out, substitutes, is two of them. One says substitute for training and one substitutes other. And so is one getting 50 and the other getting 30,000?
so what it was is the substitutes for other instruction is the 50,000.
50, okay.
And the substitutes for training and
It's getting-
development is
okay,
10,000,
okay.
and that was funding, some of the shortages. Yes, I apologize, I was doing this from home, so I can only print it in this format, not the format you're used to.
No, the format's fine. I just wanted to make sure I was getting
Yes.
my lines.
Right, yeah, it's kind of a little, yeah.
Okay. Oh, great, thank you.
But any other questions before I call on myself? Ms. Sherburne, my concern is around why our electric bill at the high school seems to be higher and needs some money. I mean, it's great that it's lower at some of our elementaries, but do we have any sense of, we would hope that that high school is the second most efficient building in our district, second only to this one. And so that
Right.
concerns me.
So generally speaking, I look at all of the utilities and as a whole, So when we build the budget, I kind of look at it, all of them, and we really didn't increase the individual lines. I just knew that we had sufficient funding, which we do right now, because I didn't have to take from another area to cover that. But when we build the budget for FY '24, I'll need to make sure at the very beginning of the school year, it's adequately budgeted in the right schools.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, oh, yes, Mr. Rotundo. You almost got to be a doctor there. Would you like to be a doctor this evening?
Thank you. Gene, in regards to the solar canopy and the solar field, is there any, is that coming to the high school to offset the electric bill, or how's that being played into the system?
So we're actually receiving more funding from the solar array that is not on our buildings.
Brimble field? The
Brimble, yes.
But, so I get that, I understand that, but are we going to get anything out of the solar arrays on the hill by the high school as well as the canopies over the parking lot?
I think, Gene, you and I talked about we should have this on a topic. How do the solar panels in general work? Because they don't work on a, say, one-to-one basis. It's not the case that the parking canopy back here powers this building one-to-one specifically. Rather, everything that's collected goes into a pool, and then we, as a client, get a discounted rate on our electricity out of that pool that's available.
Yeah, so that actually question would be better to Mr. Ailes as far as where is that going to? So I know when we talked about doing the high school and the middle school, it was not going to be bringing in as much as I am getting from Brimble. So, but I'm not sure if it's fully running yet myself.
Okay, and like I said, that's just more of a curiosity at this point, knowing that they're put there, and I understand it goes to the grid and then it's sold out in credits, but I didn't know if it was online yet.
Right, that is a good question. I can ask Mr. Ailes or.
During our last operational sustainability committee, which was now almost 6 weeks ago, it was not yet online.
Right.
And we were supposed to have an OSC approximately 2 weeks ago, and due to conflicts, we didn't have it. So we are getting updates at that. It's like a standing committee that the superintendent created. I'm the school committee rep on there, so I don't have an update. My last update is about 6 weeks old, but yeah, we can find that out.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing. All right, so there's a motion on the, did we vote on this yet? I'm sorry. Okay, there's a motion on the table. All those in favor of this transfer? Okay, that passes 5-0. All right, the next item on the agenda is a gifts to schools. Okay, I'm going to close out these other things that are distracting me. And in our gifts to school this month, it is a total of $8,290.87. This was in your packet. A good chunk of it is allocated or dedicated, earmarked for the Hannah Elementary outdoor classroom. Anybody have any questions on the other line items on this gifts to schools? I'm looking for a motion to accept this wonderful gifts to schools as a collective body of money.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Manzo. A second? Thank you, Dr. McKenzie. I'll ask again, anybody have any questions on any of these donations? Seeing none, let's vote. All those in favor? That passes 5-0. I'm just going to keep counting upwards. I'll keep adding. We have an imaginary friend maybe here this evening. Okay. Our next item on our agenda is grants acceptance. And I have a different file to share. Hold, please. Okay, here we go. This, let me see if I can make its font larger. Here we go. How is everybody seeing that okay, or should I make it a little larger still? A little larger? Okay, hold on one second. I just need to move my Zoom dock. Okay, how about this? Okay, there we go. All right. Ms. Sherburne, before you begin to speak to this, I would like to have a motion that we accept this grant, and then we'll hear from Ms. Sherburne, and then we'll decide if we want to vote that acceptance up or down.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Manzo.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Coelho. Ms. Sherburne, the floor is yours.
So we received grant 347. It's called a Playful Learning Institution Grant. It's for $68,000. It's going to be for the remainder of this year and next year. This was a competitive grant that we, I believe we were originally not into it, and then we just recently was told that they could add us to it. And it's a professional development grant to institute from pre-K to grade 3. There's professional development for this, and then it's going to help playful learning to support dive-ins for content, create equitable access to learning to all children. We do have Dr. Flaherty on the line if she has any more that she would like to add.
Yes, I'll just add that this is, we did originally apply, and the first went to schools that had higher need than we did. Several schools did not decide to continue with the grant, and so then they reached out and we were allowed to be incorporated into it as well. It's going to be a pilot grant, and it's going to be with the preschool and at Hannah Elementary, and it will provide professional development for a team of teachers, paraprofessionals, and special area teachers, along with both the administrators in both buildings. And it's a way to incorporate play into the academic day to teach content and to social skills. And it will also provide equipment with like sensory boards. There'll be an outside chalkboard that they can use for outdoor learning, and that will be available at both of the schools. I will also be sitting on the planning committee as a district leadership participant.
Looking around the room, does anybody have any questions? Yes, Mr. Geneva.
I have a question. Why did the other school decide not to continue to participate in this early learning team here?
They're not other schools from our community. They were other communities that decided not to participate, and then they were able to go deeper down into the list to schools that had less financial need.
Correct. My question was, why did they decide not to participate? Was there something that,
Do you have
I
any?
can't speak to that. I don't know if they had too much other things going on in their community, or they couldn't put a team together. You couldn't participate unless you could able to put a representative together from each grade level. So there were some areas of the grant. They may also have had additional needs. I know that there could be a lot of reasons, but I don't know even what communities they were or why they opted not to participate.
I guess my question is, I'm get skeptical when we get, grants and how it's going to help the students. It seems a lot of training for teachers is this all manipulatives, basically? Is this more for reading and writing or mathematics?
It's going to be a combination of how to use play to teach content, and also at the early developmental years, the social emotional skills and interactions. It will allow for sensory materials that we can use out in the outdoor learning spaces. So it's a combination of both academic content as well as teaching interpersonal skills and providing some equipment, but it's a lot of professional development for teachers. We'll be spending 2 days at Fitchburg State University on June 1st and June 8th.
And if this pilot goes through and everybody likes it, that means the school will have to pick up the expenses to continue the program?
It's really more of like a train the trainer type
Okay.
model, so that we can become self-sufficient, and the teachers will then pass their knowledge on to other people in the building. It shouldn't have a recurring cost to us after the grant is finished.
Okay.
That's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Yes, Mr. Manzo?
So I'm going to follow up on Juliana's question. So is there any sort of assessment or benchmarks you're looking to hit so that at the end of this pilot, you decide these things worked and these things didn't? We're going to use this but not that, or we're going to throw the whole thing out? Or is it more of a subjective assessment of, yeah, I kind of like that, let's go, keep going with it?
No, there will be assessments that come along the way. We also have to submit data. That's going to be all part of the implementation meeting, which happens on June 1st. So we'll know then exactly what each of the steps will be along the way. Mrs. Montevecchi, who is the principal at Hannah, and Miss Anderson, the principal at the preschool, are the ones that wrote the grant and went after it and put the teams together. And then there will be assessments along the way as well.
And then do you have a sense of, so you've got, it says 5 teams, or they can't be split evenly between 2 schools, obviously. So do you know where more effort's going to be put?
There's a representative from each of the grade levels, so that's why there's, I don't know off the top of my head exactly how many there are from the preschool. There's obviously more staff coming from the elementary school because it's 4 grade levels. And you had to have a classroom teacher, a para, and either a special education teacher or the L teacher is a special, area teacher that would be participating. Okay. So there are multiple people percentage-wise coming from preschool, but there'll be more elementary people there because there's more grades that are covered.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, there's a motion on the table. All those in favor of accepting this grant? That passes 5-0. All right, hold please while I switch back over to our agenda. The next item on our agenda is a buildings and grounds update. You all should have received the update in your packet. I'll throw it on the screen for a half a second. In general, due to our stacked meeting format, we receive this report ahead of time, and if you have any questions, we encourage you to email those questions to Ms. Sherburne and or myself. And so we're just going to move right along. Hold on 1 minute. Okay, the next item on our agenda is an update from our Director of Finance and Operations. And Ms. Sherburne, if you'll hold on for just a second while I juggle. I believe this is what you want, yes?
Yes.
Okay, I'll be your Venna.
Okay, so happy May. It's almost at the end of the month. What I'm going to be talking about today, administration updates, is a management letter finding, our revolving account balances. One thing I'm going to be introducing to the committee is to talk about requests for proposals. Building rentals, we have a little to talk about there, and that there's a pickleball court request, and then my financials. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss is that we have a management letter from Powers & Sullivan, the outside auditors for the city of Beverly. I received it on March 29th of 2023. And the management letter showed that we received the finding that the school's state grants fund is in a deficit in the amount of $52,000 as of June 30th, 2022. Their finding went on to say that this fund has been in a deficit for the past several years. I added in parentheses since 2010. This deficit, they stated in their finding that this deficit could be due to posting errors which would need to be corrected, or due to grant managers not requesting reimbursement in a timely manner, which could put the city at risk of missing funding opportunities. In either case, the deficit decreases the city's free cash figure at the end of each year. There's a deficit. The recommendation, the auditors recommended that the school department review the deficit grant accounts and determine if there is posting errors, reimbursements due to the city, or other adjustments that need to be made to close out the deficit. They further recommended that procedures be implemented to review grant accounts that are in the deficit balance at least quarterly to ensure that the reimbursement requests, where applicable, are submitted in a timely manner. When we received that audit finding, we had to have come up with a management response that came from the schools, which I did on the next day on 3/30/23. And that what I said is the school finance department will review the issue of the school state grant fund, SO2, being in a deficit. In their preliminary reviews, they have reviewed over 40 grants back to FY02, and that's not a typo. They will review all of the grants from FY22 all the way back to FY02 with deficits and balances available to bring their findings to the city auditor and the city's director of finance on a reason for the deficit. The school finance department will also review the federal grant funds, SO3, from FY22 back to FY02 to determine if there are posting errors between the two funds. Just for the record, the federal fund SO3 was not in a deficit. The school finance department will implement a new procedure to review previous year's grants, what are called orgs in Munis, to ensure that once the grant is expended and balanced to zero, that there are no expenditures charged to the grant. Excuse me. The school finance department outcome, the audit outcome was after reviewing over 57 separate grant funds in the state-funded grants Munis Fund SO2, the Director of Finance and the head bookkeeper accounts payable, Paul Castonway, found the following. A state grant revenue in the amount of $29,199 was posted incorrectly in 2010, hence why this, where it showed up. In the federal grants, so in other words, it went into a federal grant instead of the state grant, therefore throwing the fund in the deficit. I did find Fund Code 349 that was received in 2002, was spent in 2002, and was also spent in 2003, and the district did not receive the grant in FY03. Therefore, it created a deficit. The reason the deficit didn't show up in '03 is that we were getting enough grants that you didn't see the deficit until 2010. We found that the grants had not been cleared at the end of their life and the accounts were not inactivated. That is one thing that we're working on with the city that will do that. So occasionally I'll find, oh, wait a minute, why is that coming up? FY10 is gone and something gets charged. I kind of see that right now when I'm reviewing things. So if I can get them to be inactivated on the, with the city, then that won't be a problem in the future. After thorough review of the school administration and the city finance administration and the outside auditing firm, which was Powers and Sullivan, agreed to reduce the current year FY23 budget in the amount of $26,014.01 to correct the deficit in the state grant. And believe me, I tried to do whatever I could so I didn't have to use my appropriated funds, but by general laws, we had to, that had to be offset. So in the next coming months, you'll see that I'll have to transfer money into, and I'm going to use the high school health teacher line because that's what they actually paid for back in '03 was health teachers' salaries. So I did do what I could do, not to have to use this year's fund. I'll have to find the funding, and they've already made the adjustment in Munis to correct this. But this is one of those things that we do review, but as I wanted to point out, this was '03 and 2010. So there's no vote on this. I did not need to go to city council because we were not using this current year's, because I did ask this question, current year's money. What it is they reduced my money to pay for it. So that's the way the terminology they had to fix.
Yes, Mr. Rotundo.
Just a question on the Fund Code 349. So I understand the state grant, and I'm a little familiar with what was going on, but the total amount between what you recognized going into the wrong fund from the federal to the state, that was recognized and rectified, but the 26,000 was the additional to bring it to that total of 52,000.
Yes, yes.
Correct?
Yes, actually, what did actually happen is that the grant that they overspent was $33,000. However, we had other grants that weren't totally spent because when they never got to zero, and so it was able to offset that. So the final offset was the $26,014.01, and that, a collaboration between the superintendent, the finance people, and the city, and the outside auditing. That's how we'd had to fix it.
So
ahead.
just, so that brings you down to a zero balance. So in regards to the free cash and everything, that will clear that up going forward. correct?
Yes, yep. And so this will be today I worked with Paul on requesting funds, and that's the hard part, is that we have encumbrances that are out there. I'm not sure if that's going to be paid next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, so we need to make sure that we're requesting the funds in, but we also have to make sure that we're following Mass General laws, that I don't have too much cash in. So I can't request the cash from the state or the federal government until I'm going to be using it. So a lot of times it's that timing, but we are going to make sure that when we're requesting funds in May, June, to make sure that if any encumbrances come through, we do that. So that you'll find when you get your financials for FY '23, the school state fund will not be in the negative.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Mr. Manzo.
So if I'm following this correctly, and I doubt that I am, because this is all high finance, so you're looking 20 years back into financial records of the school district. You found 2 errors that occurred well before you were in your position, and you fixed them, and we made sure we're not going to get into the same issues again.
Correct.
Win-win?
Yep.
right?
The outside auditor was actually quite impressed that I actually was able to find that. And quite honestly, this has been on my radar for the last few years, and it's like, oh, I can't get to it. Oh, I can't get to it. And then when it came to the time that you get an audit finding, you have to make the time to find it. So I did spend quite a bit of time on that, whereas other parts of my job, I now have to get caught up on.
I don't think I've ever heard a more impressive discovery of a mistake made by someone else and recovery. Good job, great job.
Thank you, thank you. And I did fix it within, 2 months of when we got the notice, so that was pretty good. I do have to say that I did see all the business managers that were in during that time,
Okay.
the names, and I'm like, But we did fix it, and, I am not to throw stones at anybody because we all live in glass houses, so you don't know, but, and it was a learning thing that what we did find is a lot of times there are grants that had 55 cents left, 3 cents left. So, and then there was some that may have a deficit of 50 cents. So we worked with the auditors, and each year I will be looking at the previous year to make sure that the encumbrances that are out there do happen, so that we're in compliance. Because when we do a final report, it's based on what's encumbered and spent. And then what happens is the PO came in $100 less. Okay, we have to rectify that.
And ideally, when that happens and the year ends and there's money left, it goes back to the grant funder,
Yes.
which would be the federal government or the state government.
State, yep. And we did have some of those issues where we did send the funds back, and I'm still trying to correct our accounting because we sent the money back, there's record of that, but it still was left like unexpended because we didn't reduce the budget. So it was a learning curve on that too, is that, how, I really double checked, and when it was brought to my attention, it was like, it's only a 5-minute journal entry. And I says, but I could not, my school committee would not love me if I said, oh, okay, I'll just make that correction. I needed to know why. and I know who got paid, when they got paid incorrectly, and we did see where the money went into the wrong account and fixed it. And for the record, on SO3, the federal grants, I took the avenue, I've started today and moving back, and Erin and I were working on it this afternoon, and I think we're in FY16. So we're
Catching
getting
up.
there. But I do think that the problems are going to be from 11 before I came, that I'm going to have to do some digging. But right now, it's like, oh, okay, yep, we know what that was. Okay, yep, we can fix those, so we're
I
getting
just,
there.
I wish to reiterate my predecessor's compliment and say, from my point of view, I think that you don't know what you don't know. And when you realize, okay, we have this quote unquote hole in our in our procedures, or a gap, and okay, now we can make it better. I think that for me, in a positive Patty persona, from a purely optimistic point of view, to say, okay, we can take away from this, we are improving our own processes, and it shouldn't ever happen again. And the fact that this was lurking in there for however many years, that fine-tooth comb exercise was, I'm sure, a little painful for you, but I appreciate it. And I appreciate the fact that you explained it to us rather than just, balancing the checkbook by putting in a correction.
Right.
For in layman's terms, that's what a particular person suggested you do, but I certainly appreciate that we didn't do that.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. On to the next item. So the next item is revolving accounts. So each year, I usually try to give a balancing of revolving accounts. And since we've been making a lot of changes on the upcoming fiscal year budget of using more revolving offsets than we have in the past, which is why we didn't have to go to the city for even more money than we went to, I thought that it'd be best if I give a little report on the revolving accounts. So the food service revolving account, which is 20010, the person responsible for this is the food service director. And as of May 19th, this is when I ran the report, we had $1,662,908 in the account. I'm saying here in anticipated expenses in the current year, the only thing I really will know is salaries. But Ms. Leal would know how much food costs they're buying, all that stuff. So what I said on this here, just to stay consistent with the other ones, is that I know that there's going to be $113,535 that's going to be spent. As far as a budget offset, we don't have any budget offsets. We've actually been running with a positive balance in the revolving of funds, where Mr. Rotondo and I, when I first came, we had a different story to tell. So the food service program does pay for salaries, food costs, unpaid balances if we need any. Right now, everybody is eating for free. Cafeteria equipment and maintenance. And they do suggest that if you should have a good, healthy balance in your revolving account of 3 to 6 months, which we have more than, but right now we do have that surplus because right now the government is everybody's eating free. But that's a good balance to have right now, but we could not offset that anywhere else.
Question before you move on. So
Yep.
the middle column of anticipated expenses, anticipated expenses in the current fiscal year, can we think of those as encumbered funds?
Yes, you can think of it
Known-
as encumbered, or I looked at the payrolls and calculated what a normal thing is.
So that's like the bare minimum of
Yeah.
encumbrance out of the first column.
Yes,
And potentially the third column is known, in essence, encumbrances or known dependency on the first column in next year's fiscal
when we
budget.
built the budget.
When we built the budget. But food services is kind of a unicorn in this list because it has to be self-sufficient.
Sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And yes, please interrupt me at any time on each one, that's fine. The Gifts to Schools account, that's number 20082 in Munis. The principals and various administrators are responsible for that. Currently, we have 73,274 in there. It's unknown to me on what people are going to spend. If they haven't told me yet and it's not encumbered, I would say 0 right now. However, a request can come in tomorrow that, Hannah wants to use their money for something. The donations come in as you just approved this evening from everywhere, but also Bev Ed has a account number in the Gifts to Schools. So next week, when they come in with all their checks, those will be deposited into this account. But it's a healthy 73,000 is not an awful lot, but there's many various accounts in there.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt again.
No.
For instance, the money that we accepted to build the outdoor, I think at Hannah,
Classroom.
that's in there.
Yep.
But that has to be spent on that thing.
Correct.
So,
And it's going to roll because it's not going to be done, later on I'm going to be talking about RFPs that are out there, and Hannah Outdoor Classroom is one of them. So that's not going to be spent till next year. So I haven't said that we have a budget offset to that, but this is as a revolving account, it can roll. But
Right,
it has
but-
to be used for the specific reason,
if we look back at what we accepted earlier today, there's very little that we accept in general in the Gifts to Schools that is other.
Yep.
So in essence, most of this is encumbered. We just don't see it itemized, but somewhere it's itemized, right?
Right, so what you do see is that you say, you get portrait revenues, and the principal puts it in there. So the principal has ideas that it's going to be for enrichment, or it's going to be for this. It may not be encumbered, but it's set for that particular school where that principal has control of it.
Right, but even that, I think, is a small percentage compared to, like, the Bev Ed grants. We know somebody wrote and said, I want to do this with the money, and therefore there is a very specific thing that we have to spend that money on.
Correct, like those people that donated, that did the readathon for the Hannah. I can't say, Gabrielle can't say to me, I'm going to use that on this. It has to be used on that specific.
Okay, thank you.
And
Did
we
you-
have all of this in Excel documents.
Okay. Anybody else? Sorry, I'm pigletting the airtime this evening.
The next one I have is the Education Fund, number 20090. I say the superintendent has control of that. We have 18,632 in that. Those donations come from the taxpayers when they make their tax payment. They put money earmarked for education. And the superintendent, past and present, has said that they'd like it be used for enrichment programs. And currently, the superintendent has talked about 2 areas that would be receiving funds for enrichment programs. One I know is at North Beverly for Express Yourself, and I believe the other one was going to be used for Nature's Classroom, helping with the student needs there. And that will be depleted, that we don't get in as much on that. I think that's one of those areas that if people have, like, their mortgage takes their taxes out and they pay the tax bill, people don't see that, but we do receive in, I didn't see when we talk about revenues, we took in $405 this year, so it's not an awful lot. The Scholarship Fund, 20100, is on the similar idea that people donate for scholarships. The balance there is $7,836. Each year, we get about a $1,000 request for a scholarship that comes out of the high school, and they tell us, and then we write the check to the college that the student that receives that scholarship for. I do believe there is talk about maybe going out and having some fundraising to build that up, but that has been just dwindling each year. Again, if people are having their taxes, they might not check that off. Circuit breaker, that's the big one. So currently, number 20108, currently we have 2,763,792. I do know of 490,465 that is encumbered currently for the tuitions. And what I wanted to point out here is that you can see the budget offset that we have built in our budget is 4,299,641. With the circuit breaker, whatever you receive for funds in one year has to be spent in the following year. But you can roll over a whole year's worth. When we built the budget, we are anticipating of using not only all of what we received this year, but we're estimating that we're going to have to use 40% of what we receive next year for the current year, which is not a good position to be in. But the reason for that is, as you've heard me saying, Dr. Schroeck talking during budget, the OSD and that 14%. We're saying we're going to use the circuit breaker if we don't get any funding help from the state. So the state is talking about it, but we had to build our budget, so that is why that is much higher. The other thing to keep in mind is each year, say we have more students that are out that are costing more and we're receiving circuit breaker, it will be building in the next year. So I'm thinking $3 million is about what we're going to have taken in, which we're still waiting for our last payment. So we're going to be using, say, $1.2 million of next year's. So that can only be used for special education purposes. So we use it for tuitions. No questions on that one. School choice, 20110, we have in the coffers at the moment, 831,908. That's monies that come in for school choice in. We're anticipating for the remainder of the year, 251,482. And then when we build next year's budget, we're using, planning on using 931,550, which is more than we are taking in. I think it's approximately 600,000. So we're using 300,000. So we were able to build that up a little bit, but we're going to be using it.
And so in general, some of these accounts are going to be stable over time? Some of these accounts will be stable over time. This is one account where you're going to see a drop in the overall.
Yes, yep,
revolving
So we
account.
kind of had built it up, and now we're going to be using it. What we have to be careful of is when that year is that if you're budgeting a 931 offset and you're only taking in 600, I'm saying, if we have 831 now, we're going to lose 250, that's not going to last for too many years. However, it might be that, the high school doesn't need, we just use the high school in English and science. It's not what it really is for, because school choice is for the district-wide. So we just have to make sure that when we're building our budgets in FY '26, 5 and 26, that we're not keeping that 931 there, because there is no balance. The Creative School Grants, MCC 20111, there's $904 left in there, and they'll be using that for field trips at the end for this year. And that money comes from the Mass Cultural Council for transportation for field trips in their STARS residency programs. Unfortunately, we did not receive any STARS residencies for this year, and they were concentrating their efforts on schools that did not receive it and low income, so we didn't qualify for some of the things. So when I found out we didn't receive any this year, I did check in with them to see why. Hence, that's one of the reasons that Dr. Schroeck said the education fund could go to Express Yourself, because North Beverly did ask for that in their grant, and it got denied. The one-to-one laptop, 20113, that has 224,685 in it right now. Just as a reminder, this is for the laptop payments for the students, the 4-year lease programs. So I would expect to have a balance in here because we have been collecting, we collect over 4 years to pay. And that is only used for the laptop, paying Apple for the leases. Transportation, 20114, is 438,637 is in there right now. I'm anticipating about 2,500 that we're going to be spending. However, we have a lease, an RFP out there that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes for some vehicles, and we do plan on utilizing some of that if we need it for the vehicles. Driver salaries come out of here, and any transportation costs is what that's for, because that's revenue we receive in for students taking the bus, so it can only be used on transportation. School rental receipts, that's our building rental, 20305. We have 650,286 in there right now. We're going to be using 110,000. That is for custodial salaries. I've only taken half of it out. And when we built the budget for next year, it's going to be 365,000 because we built into the budget that they needed custodial supplies, which, as you recall in my transfer earlier, that we were short. We're figuring on the cost, the increased costs. Instead of building more money in the budget, asking for the city for additional funds for that, we put in that there's going to be a budget offset of $120,000 for custodial supplies coming out of here. The other thing that we're looking to utilize this fund for is if there's any big equipment that, snow removal, those drivable floor cleaners. And another thing that we're looking at is we received an update from Bob a few F&Fs ago about playgrounds. So we might need to do some repairs of playgrounds, and so we wanted to, use that for that purpose. And I kind of think of it as any major purchases that we have to do in the buildings and grounds area that's not covered by the budget. Preschool revolving, number 20309. We have 318,397 in there. We're going to be spending 28,756 for the remainder of the year. And that has been our offset, budget offset's been about 45,000. And when we built this year's budget, we built in that we'd be using 137,000. So I kind of look at it and say, okay, I don't want to deplete it all in one year. How can I wean that down? So we increased it to 137, so that would be using about a third of what the balance is.
And I wish to interject here. This is probably, like you said earlier, Mr. Manzo, one of the accounts that we cannot necessarily expect that it will remain level, because we really don't know how many children would pay to be in our preschool versus
Correct.
children who are entitled to be in the preschool who don't have to pay.
Right, yes. So what happens in there is anybody that gets a scholarship for preschool, there's no fund that it comes from.
Right.
And this would help offset that. Elementary music, 20314. This is the remaining funds that we had in there from when we used to charge a few years ago, and there's $6,690. And they're purchasing supplies for the elementary musical program, replacing some equipment that needed to be replaced. And that request has come through to the Dr. Flaherty's office, and we know we're going to be expending that, and then that balance will be zero. And we don't have any offset we used to pay for part of the elementary music teacher. That is now absorbed in the budget. Athletics, number 20315, there's a balance of 221,314. We know that we haven't paid for the spring coaches, about 80,000. Next year, it's 209,748, which is the same amount that we've used for the last few years on user fees to pay for coaches' salaries. And that's an area that usually we carry over around anywhere from 120,000 up to 200,000. So going from 221 down to 8 and removing 80 from that, that's not leaving them with a significant balance. It's not the norm. Summer school 20320 has 7,879, and I've told Ms. Taylor that for the summer school, this program, that's what they have for a balance. And they will, if they're charging this year, they'll be taking it a little bit more, but we hadn't been charging, and we hadn't been taking outside Beverly students in. But that money would come in from students paying for summer school. The next two is the BHS and the middle school student activity accounts. Those are handled by the high school and the middle school principals. Their balance is $154,630 and $128,540. I'm guesstimating that it's going to be $80,000 spent because I'm thinking junior prom, senior prom, all of the activities that are going on at the middle school, and there is no budget offset, and that money is raised for the student activities and can only be used for the student activities. The next one I have is the sped tuition revolving, 20863. Ms. Blansky talked about that at the last meeting that she was here, talking about the way she brings students in. The balance we have right now is $243,110. We're still going to be spending about $40,000 for the remainder of the year, and where our budget offset next year is $217,446. Another area, just like the school choice, we have to watch, because if we don't have students coming in, we don't want to build it that we're using it for salaries. So I want to make sure that we're not spending it all in one year, that we have a cliff. The last one I have is the non-resident tuition revolving. That's called the SEVIS program. That's at the high school. That is where students can come into Beverly High School for 1 year from foreign countries, and they pay a tuition into it. That's $625,526 currently. We're going to be spending $290,817 out of this year, which will, and next year we have $286,986 that we are going to be using for offsets in the budget. And that's for teacher salaries and for Teach 6 stipends.
And this one, too, is somewhat precarious.
Yes.
Because if we, for instance, cannot find housing for the children who want to come here as exchange students, then we can't take them, we can't take their money.
Right, exactly. And we, some years we get a lot, and some years other districts get them. So Ms. Taylor's been working really hard with the organization to making sure. It seemed like we had a little dip a few years ago, but also, we're out there in advertising, per se, in their world, but they like to charge you to advertise, and we don't. So we're trying to keep our name out there that we're accepting students, but they were at one time asking for us to pay like a fee for them to promote us, and we're like, no, we'll promote ourselves. So that's what I have for the revolving accounts. This isn't the end of, obviously, we have another month and a half to go till the end of the year, and then we finish. But I thought it would be good to give this update to the F&F committee as we get going into our budget processing, with the city.
Anybody have any questions on the revolving accounts? All right, I'm trying to go next, Jean. Hold on a second. There we go.
The next thing is, this is something, as I was building the agenda and I was talking to Ms. Visnick about it, I was thinking like, okay, well, what else can I kind of inform the committee about? And this is one area that I've never really brought 4th, and it's not to vote on, but it's informational. So any times that we purchase anything, we have to follow Chapter 30B rules and regulations. And when you get to a certain dollar threshold, you have to go out and request funds, request for proposals, which is called an RFP. If we can purchase off the state contract, then you'd only have to get quotes. So some things that's just a quote is all we need to do, like $50,000. But if something is going to be much higher, we have to go out to a formal request for proposal, which we do through David Gelano's purchasing department at the city. So I did give the link there, how you can get out to the city's website to see what requests for proposals are out there, and that's going to have all of the city's proposals out there. But I wanted to report to the school committee. So earlier, we talked about the turf field at one of our meetings, talking about it, and now it's just getting there. So currently, we have a 10-year lease for electric school buses. We're bidding out for 2, and this would be a 10-year lease versus purchasing. 2 seat buses that are 71 passengers, and 2 Type A, which is a 29-passenger buses. When you go out to a request for proposal, that is what you're looking for, a request for proposal. It doesn't mean you're committed to it, that you have to buy it, but it is that we are thinking about it. You obviously don't want to go out and put a request that you're not going to purchase something. But there is, if it came back that you couldn't afford it, then you didn't need to award it. The after-school childcare program is a 5-year contract. I put in parentheses here, that's actually a revenue source for us, and that revenue source goes into the building rental revolving. This bid is for after-school childcare at 5 elementary schools and the middle school. Currently, the vendor that has that is the YMCA. But this goes out to a formal request that people, there's been years that we have gotten more than one vendor request, and then we have to analyze their bids to see which is the best. But that one actually is a revenue to us, not an expense. The next 4 fall under the buildings and grounds. So there's a mechanical preventative maintenance program. This is a bid on the maintenance program for the boilers and cooled chillers at BHS and BMS. And that was something that we have out there to find out what the cost would be, but also we were trying to get an HVAC person in on our budget as a position. We've never been able to do that. So that would be, this person would be, or this vendor may do those instead, but that is out there. The middle school outdoor classroom turf. So this is for the space that's outside the cafeteria, and that's what we talked about a few weeks ago. And this is talking about putting synthetic turf where we can't grow grass. The Centerville classroom flooring, last year or the year before, we put in new flooring. And this bid is to go out and do the remaining classrooms and the office or special needs offices flooring at Centerville. And that, I forgot to say that the middle school turf and the next 2 are going to be ESSER funded with our ESSER 3 that ends at the end of next year. We could actually go into September of '25, but it really ends in FY '24. And then the last one is the Hannah Outdoor Classroom. So we know we received some fundraising from them, and then the remainder of what we were going to have to pay for would come out of ESSER. So those are what's going out to bid. With an RFP, you put it out there to bid, they have a deadline, you have a committee that reviews them to see. Sometimes you get multiple vendors, sometimes you only get one. Next one. Did you have any questions on that?
Who decides? The administration then gets the bids and says, okay, we're going to pick this one here?
Yep, so we'll look at it, so sometimes we'll look at it, and with the Mass General laws for procurement, you have to pick the most responsive and responsible. So sometimes you may get a bid that comes in at much lower, but they don't have good references, so you never want to purchase something that, you're going to have problems with. But you would have a committee, so on all of these, it would be, the superintendent, the buildings and grounds, the principal, and maybe Mr. Collins looking over it and see, what it is. Generally speaking, they usually come in very similar, but you might have something that's way off that, and what are they seeing that you don't see? And sometimes you have to have questions, and anytime that somebody has a question on an RFP, then the city has to then send out to all the people that requested the bid what the questions are. So if you ask a question and we're both bidding against it, I'm going to find out what you asked. So it might be a little bit more detail. And all of these, when you go out to the Beverly, to their site, when you click on it, you have to register that you want it. So then they have a record of everybody that looked at it. So sometimes you might only see one or two. Other times they've had 10 inquiries and they only get 2 bids because, we go from there.
Thank you.
The next thing I have is the school building rentals. So we were, Ms. Visnick and I was trying to give some information as far as building rentals and the procedure that we have. And my last item that I'm going to be talking about talks about rentals. So what I've said here is I've attached to the committee the policy for community use, which is our KF and KFR. It outlines the regulations and procedures governing the use of facilities. Our policy includes the building use fees and the basic schedule, as well as the application and school finance. I did find that on our website, you can find it easily in one place, and another place there's a broken link. And Ms. Faulkner is going to be in tomorrow, and I've sent it to her to get the link so that you can find it. And I'm under the assumption that we're going to be reviewing all of our policies, so I put on that we'd be reviewing this in the fall. There has been some questions about HERD and who can rent that, so we'll be having that discussion in September. And then, so I did put in on this, the link, and when Ms. Bergeron puts this out, we'll make sure that she's putting out the live document, not a PDF. So the community use is in there. I did have conversation with Mr. Doig today because I didn't want to give the wrong information. And he said the school fields are permitted by the Beverly Rec Department, and more information can be found on their website, which I linked there. And then he talked about the link that they have for their policy and field applications, which is field and court and facility permit policy, and like us, their application is right in there. And the reason why we're talking about it is on my next subject is talking about pickleball. If somebody wants to utilize a field and/or tennis courts or pickleball, like Aubert Park, then, if somebody wants to just go play and nobody's there, they can play. But if somebody wants to have it every Monday at 6 p.m., then they do have to go through the rec department.
I think too, right, in a previous meeting, a school committee member asked, how do we file, right? How does somebody rent, say the airport soccer fields? And there is a little bit of confusion. Ms. Sherburne and I have talked about the fact that the building rental form includes HERD, but in fact, outdoor spaces are managed by the rec department, and the indoor spaces are managed by the business office. And so there, in both cases, there is a pecking order. And so as you might imagine, our varsity baseball team gets first dibs on the varsity baseball field, and then the pecking order goes down there. And so, Mr. Doig, who manages the outdoor spaces, makes sure that he's in communication with the athletic director, and that pecking order is preserved. And similarly, if someone were to ask for, the basketball courts at Beverly High, that request, even though it goes through Jean's office, the first thing that happens is they call over to the high school and they talk to the head maintenance man at the high school, and he's got a big calendar on the wall, and he knows when our varsity and JV sports are using that facility, and then what's left over then could be quote unquote rented out. And I say quote unquote because the form that you fill out if you want to use one of these facilities talks about what kind of organization are you. And if you're an AAU team, then we are going to rent it to you. We're going to charge you money because somebody in your organization is making money. But if you're, Beverly Youth Soccer or something like that, then we're not going to charge you because you, out of the goodness of your heart, are giving your services and running youth sports for the benefit of some huge percentage of Beverly families, if not 100% Beverly families. So there's a lot of information on that form, and maybe we'll have a more in-depth conversation about it at a future meeting.
Yes, I think that we'll probably be having some conversations over the summer and then in the fall, because the other thing too is that we revamped that application back, I think in 19 or 16, and some of the fees, the custodians, if they work on a Sunday, get double time. We need to make sure we're taking in enough to cover that. So we need to revisit that also on our fee schedule. And then my last thing before my reports here is that at the request of the pickleball community, we have pickleball. We will have pickleball lines painted on the tennis court that is the furthest from the building at Beverly High School. There will be a storage box placed outside the tennis court for pickleball equipment storage. Both the superintendent and the athletic director ensured that the additional lines will not interfere with the high school interscholastic tennis program. And permitting will be managed by the Beverly Rec Department. So that's one of the things I did call Bruce about. I did reach out to Dan Keefe, the athletic director, to make sure that he was aware of this and knew that. And the superintendent and the mayor and I had a meeting discussing bringing this forth. He was thinking that we needed to vote on it, but we said, no, it's not a voting thing. It's just an informational, that we're going to paint the lines that both tennis people and pickleball people can play on. Not at the same time, though. So that's really informational.
Go ahead.
This is just on one of the courts, so there's multiple courts there, and so just one court will be,
It's like an experiment.
Yeah,
yes.
we're doing it on one. We didn't want to, right now, I've been told we have 6, and we use 5
when they have a tournament.
when there's a tournament.
Yeah,
And we wouldn't want it on, a tournament
right.
field.
It's good to know that but if you had to use it for a tennis match, it's not going to interfere with, according to MIAA, they're okay with this, I guess.
Yes, yep, they
if
did.
the
That was the
different
first thing that Dr.
Okay.
Schroeck did, check with the MIAA.
And so what's the pickleball community? Is there like a group out there that?
I guess there's a community out there, so I do hear that Aubert, they're using that. And maybe.
Wish
Mr.
to
Rotundo
recognize
on the
Mr. Rotundo to
council
answer this
knows.
question.
It started at Old Bear Park.
Yeah.
It's right now multi-use. It has tennis as well as pickleballers with the pickleball court. There will be a permanent one built up at the soccer field. There'll be 4 courts there. And the mayor, in response to the overwhelming use, I believe it's starting to be played in the middle school right now, and some of the younger kids are, but it's a bigger community starting to grow and grow. So the mayor wanted to find a 3rd location, and it was discussed there, but again, as Jean has stated, that make sure that it wasn't going to interfere with the MIA rules, that it wasn't going to take away from the school. So it's sort of like it's growing a new sport in new courts, similar to what we have basketball and tennis throughout the city. So it has become a very large vocal group. It's been a very interesting process, to say the least.
You,
So I would add, I think it's great that we're doing this. I'd add a couple cautions. There's a active pickleball community. at my second home, and it's a lot of cars, a lot of parking, a lot of people, and that noise, the pickleball noise, is very distinctive, and so you may find that you might get some calls from neighbors on Jordan and the one that begins with a W, that if it's like an all-day, all-Saturday thing, you may start getting some phone calls from people saying, could you put up some sound blocking stuff?
And I'm glad that Mr. Deweg is the one that's going to be renting them out, that he'll
And
be
he'll be
getting the
getting those phone
calls.
calls,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, and I think, so I know that you're fairly familiar, quote unquote, across the street from the tennis courts is a basketball court, an outdoor basketball court. And there is a sign there, and that basketball court really is in somebody's backyard, right? At least the tennis courts are a little further away, as is the softball field is in somebody's backyard. And so on the fence of the basketball court, there is a sign that talks about you can only play during these hours. And so I wish to recognize, I was going to actually ask earlier, are we going to put that sign on the fence of the tennis court specifically for that pickleball court? But I also wish to recognize the noise potential, and I have spoken with the mayor about that. And that noise is part of the reason why there will, quote unquote, only be 4 courts up at the airport. So rather than say, okay, we're going to put, 8 or more courts up at the airport and that community be inundated with the traffic and the noise, the idea is to kind of spread it out. And so, for instance, the gym that I go to, the basketball court has posted hours when there's pickleball. And so I think that it's wildly popular right now. If you were to take a gym class at Beverly High right now, if you had a child taking gym class, there's a whole session where there multiple pickleball courts are set up on the tartan floor on the one end of the field house, and the children are playing pickleball as well. So
Sweeping the nation.
it is.
So the only thing is, the sign about the when you can play, I think with the basketball court, it's probably you can't play after X o'clock. With the pickleball, you may find you can't play before 5 o'clock on a Saturday morning because they get up early, they get going. So, so you may find that you have a different issue with pickleball than the basketball, but I'm glad you're all on top of it, so.
Yes, Mr. Rotundo.
Just in response, I just had this conversation with the mayor this morning, and he is going to put limitations to the times on that court, but as well as up at the pickleball that's being built currently up at the Birchfield, is they have mitigation barriers that they're going to put around it. If those are successful, he'll look into Aubert Park, because that was one of the concerns and complaints that happened initially, and that has since died down. But if that's the case, and it becomes an issue at the high school, he'll look at that too. But there will be limitations of when it can and can't be used.
Okay.
So he's well aware of that.
They're also quieter rackets, apparently.
Yeah, well, that's to get the pickleballers that are traditionalists and don't believe that those work as well.
And we also want to make sure that it's not being used during school time, that if there's going to be a class out there. So the next thing I have is my revenue request.
Oh, I'm coming. Revenue report. All right. All right, it is on the screen, my queen.
So the funding is coming in as we are anticipating. Circuit breaker, there's still another quarterly payment coming in. School choice, we received that monthly, so it looks like 2 more months. The transportation revolving account is coming in a little lower than we anticipated, but we do have some field trips that charters that will be there. What I do know is that if we don't receive, we only received 172 678 right now that we do have in that revolving account that I talked about earlier, that 45,000 can be absorbed in there. Building rental, I do believe that we're going to go over the 225 that we're forecasting, because we still have May and June YMCA rental funding coming in, plus we still have church in one of the buildings. The preschool revolving, as you can see, we've taken in 185. Therefore, that's one of the reasons why we were increasing what the offset could be for, and that would be covering more additional teachers with the revolving. And the 14,870 is probably for the last month of payments coming in. And the user fees, pretty sure that they've come in at this point of 209,384. So our forecast of 209,748 was pretty good, based on that you don't ever know how many people are going to get scholarships. So as far as the revenue is concerned, I'm making myself a note that we will see that the FY23 budget is going to go down the $26,014.01 that, but that has not hit the Munis record yet. And then the last thing I have is my lovely year-to-date expenditure report. So as I usually point you to the OT 275, which is on page 33 of the report page 33. And as you can see, we have, at this time, we have 50,327.99. That's because I just moved the 50,000 in. I didn't move any funding into the long-term sub, which is the next line. We have 35,206, and I think that is going to be really close based on what we've been paying out. Areas, so, I mean, this is the time where we start looking at, where do we have some funding that can be used for other purposes, or, where we're going to have some deficits. On page 35, the health insurance line, we still have the quarterly payments, so it looks like we have a lot of money in that line, but that's a quarterly payment that the city will do on June 30th. SP 860 area is an area that I look at, and right now we do have it looks like 600,000 available in there that we can do prepayments for tuition. So there's not many things that you can use your funding, the current year funding on for next year. So that's an area where I think we prepaid about 700,000 last year. So we're pretty much in line there. That just recently grew because I needed to make sure I spent all of the circuit breaker that we received last year on this year. And I did find that we had about 300,000 that we needed to move. So how we do that is we move the expense to circuit breaker, which freed up the money. That's why you see the 355 in the private day, because I did that. Currently, we have $1,763,970 in encumbrances throughout. And right now we have 16 million left. I always laugh at this time of year when we have one more teacher's payroll, and then it's everything as it's going along, you're feeling pretty good, and then all of a sudden you're going to have equivalent to 5 weeks come out. And of course, it's the last week before the end of the fiscal year. So what I'll be doing is working with the payroll person to check different areas to see how we're doing. If you look at page 3, sorry to make you jump all the way back. So the heirs, I did move some money because that's where I was able to find it, because I started looking at it. So we should be approximately in the 73% right now for teachers. So it's usually about the 73.1 is about where we're at. So when I look at an account, if I see that I'm lower, so like phys ed, I'm at 54%. So what happened is I did find that we had somebody that took a leave of absence that I would be able to use that money towards a substitute. So that's where I'll be digging in the next month to see where things are. So a lot of times I'm not really sure of where I may have some money because of that situation, but when I look at the salary accounts, I'll run this report just salary accounts so I can see it clearer. I'm looking at page 15. I see that the teachers in the Hannah, everybody's pretty much at 73% except for the grade 4. So it's at 69%, so it's not that much off. But it could be that somebody took some time, maybe somebody had an extended leave and they ran out of sick time. There could be so many circumstances that happen there. So then jumping to page 18, I can see areas where most of everybody's at 73%, and then 81% would be the technology, so that's a little bit higher. But what I do know is under that technology line, the ROTC officers, we receive money from the Marines, and it comes in monthly, but we've been paying them, so that I anticipate payments that are going to be offset to that. And then the science, that's a school choice account that we offset. So those are all the areas that I'll be looking at. There's nothing in here that makes me alarmed that I'm not going to be able to close out everything. But if anybody has any specific questions, they can ask or email me.
Well, since we're here. The only thing that jumped out at me maybe a little bit, and I'm not all that worried, is buildings and grounds accounts seem to be pretty well spent down. So like on page 7, you'll see that one group of BG 740 lines. It sums out to almost 97% spent.
Yes.
And so you're going to have money to do stuff between now and the end of the school year for summer projects and so on. That money just has to come from somewhere else, I guess?
Yes, yep, so what I did, as you remember in the transfer that I did fix a lot of the buildings and grounds. So what actually happens is I run a report and says, give me any account that is in the negative, and then I'll fix it, because we don't want to stop Bob from doing what he needs to do, but I know I'm going to move it. If I can fix something from buildings and grounds, B&G to B&G, I can do that on my own. If I can't. So I went through and scrubbed all his accounts, and I'm like, ooh, I'm not going to be able to do all of that. Then I need to fix things. And it's quite honestly, it's kind of funny is that I cleaned out the snow removal account and I took away $15,000, and then I just saw 2 bills that came across my desk this week. So we missed a payment, or they're just billing us for the last storm, which I think if we missed it. So those are the things. So yes, buildings and grounds is really a tight area. So like they'll come to me and say, we're building the budget next year. That's again why we offset 120,000 with the revolving. But we don't throw extra money for just rainy day. So, I mean, that's one area. So, I mean, we have a tight budget in the schools, especially in buildings and grounds where people may think that, oh, that's where they could have some excess, but we don't. So that is one area, but I do know I have a few more leaves of absences that people aren't going to get paid in their balloon check that I'll be able to move, but I'll be bringing those. That's why we're having the meeting in June. Hopefully I'll have all of that done, except the last payroll is after that meeting,
But it is also an area that when summer rolls around, you've got people and time in buildings that need to be cleaned and things need to be fixed. And so somehow the money gets appropriated for all that.
Right, so remember, we start our fiscal year on July 1st. So we actually they can start spending that money. We can start encumbering it and get the supplies in. And Bob will make sure that he's purchasing whatever they need for the start out of this. But you also don't really want to be using FY23 money for FY24 expenses. So kind of get it on that edge, make sure we have enough to start, but then we'll be using next year's money for that.
Yep. Thanks.
All right, any other questions on revenues and expenses? Seeing none, I will kindly ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. McKenzie and Ms. Coelho. It's non-debatable. Those in favor? 5-0. We're finished at 8:01. Thank you very much. We're meeting, our next meeting is on June 14th at 6 o'clock. That's an early start, and we're only meeting for a half an hour because we're triple stacked that evening in order to free up June 21st for the 8th grade move-up ceremony, so that our school committee members can go celebrate our 8th graders moving on up.
And we do plan on having the Buildings and Grounds people live at our meeting. And he's
From
going to
New
be
York.
talking about summer and other projects that, where they
So we're going to
stand.
have transfers. We're going to maybe have gifts to schools. So we'll have a few voting items, and then we'll have B&G. So if you want to think about what you might want to ask your favorite B&G guys, they'll be live and in person. All right. Thank you so much. Good night.
you.
Thanks, BevCam.